Hello, and welcome to day 3 of Mindful Living Week. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network and the producer of Mindful Living Week. And in this session, we're going to be learning from Dr. Christine Carter, who's a sociologist, happiness expert, and senior fellow at the Greater Good Science Center. She's the author of The Sweet Spot: How to Find Your Groove at Home and Work, and Raising Happiness. And in this session, we'll be exploring how to embrace bravery over perfection and what it takes to live with authenticity and joy. Thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Carter.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be here.
So you've been studying happiness for over 17 years. And I want to ask you, what are some of the ways that we confuse what will make us happy?
Well, I think that we really confuse happiness as a positive emotion that kind of goes along with gratitude or awe or any of the other positive emotions. We can talk about this a little bit more. We confuse positive emotions and gratification or pleasure, right? We conflate the two things. We think, I just want to be happy. And then we pursue pleasure or gratifying things. Like we go out and we buy a cute new pair of shoes, or we have a beautiful meal, or we do these things that bring us a ton of pleasure and not actually much in the realm of a positive emotion. So first of all, thinking about positive emotions, really important to understand what we're talking about. So I mentioned a couple: gratitude or appreciation is a positive emotion about the past. Happiness, contentment, engagement, passion. These are the positive emotions in the present. The future, right? Optimism, faith, hope. Confidence is a really important positive emotion about the future. And then at the Greater Good Science Center, we study more global ones like inspiration, elevation, awe, or about other people like compassion and love. Those are our most powerful positive emotions, right? Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about happiness. We conflate those things with things that stimulate the reward system in our brain. Totally different physiologically, totally different from a brain standpoint, in terms of what is actually happening in our bodies and in our brains and really in our hearts. And so that's the big confusion. And I would say almost everyone is pretty confused about this, and it's getting worse, right? Like it's getting more as we have more and more access to things that trigger the reward system in our brain that bring us pleasure, the more and more confused we get about what it is that we want.
Could you give us a few examples of some of the ways we might seek that sort of reward center, instant gratification that aren't leading us to happiness?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the sensory pleasures are really stimulate the reward system. I mean, if you think about it, prior to the 1800s, we had very little access to anything that stimulated the reward system in our brain. There were no stores, so there was no shopping. Sugar was really, really hard to come by, right? Food was much more scarce in general, but really rewarding foods like sugar or sugar combined with fat it was really rare treats. There was basically no porn. There might have been some gambling. I don't really know about that. But for the most part, like the things that we're surrounded by every single day. Now, every little part of our environment tends to trigger the reward system. We have devices that we can check, and they stimulate the reward center in our brain a little bit, right? They cause this sort of, it's almost like gambling, right? Sometimes you're going to get something really good and that you're really interested in, and sometimes not. And that actually creates a bigger hit in your physiologically in terms of stimulating your reward system. So any technology, there's sugar basically in everything. Even like, in 1750, you could have mead or wine or an alcoholic drink, but they didn't have the technology to get it above 5% alcohol. Now, like a beer I pick up at the Trader Joe's is cheap, and it's like a beautiful Belgian beer at 12% alcohol, right? You know what I mean? Like, so it's just everywhere.
And so when it comes to this other side of cultivating more lasting, genuine happiness, what are some of the most important things for us to pay attention to?
What is the secret to happiness?
Yeah.
It didn't take you very long to ask. Okay, well, I will tell you the secret to happiness is real, live, face-to-face interactions with people, our relationships. So if we look at all the research that we have in neuroscience and sociology and psychology and even anthropology across the ages, the single strongest finding that we have about well-being or happiness, oftentimes it's also health and longevity, but let's just call it all well-being right now, is that a person's happiness is best predicted by the breadth and the depth of their social connections. So it's having a lot and it's having deep ones too. It's not either or. Like even if you're introverted, it still matters that you feel connected to your people, right? We evolved to be in tribes essentially, or clans, and our nervous system really only feels safe when we're connected. And unfortunately, it doesn't seem to work to have 1,000 friends on Facebook. That is not the type of connection that our nervous system needs.
I've also seen some of your work on gratitude, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the role of gratitude in cultivating happiness as well.
Well, gratitude is one of those really powerful positive emotions, and in part, it's powerful because it's really can be a connecting emotion, right? When I feel grateful to you and I express it, it deepens my connection to you in one way or another. And gratitude works in a lot of different ways. It's very, very interesting. So first of all, it works just like all the other positive emotions work in that the function of all of our emotions have different functions. The functions of the positive emotions are to put the brakes on any sort of fight or flight response, which might be taking place in our body. So they basically reduce stress, right? They lower our heart rate, they lower our blood pressure, they make us feel calm. So gratitude works that way. And that is enough, right? Like that helps us sleep better. People tend to report having more energy. And a lot of this is because of the reduction in stress, basically, that they're feeling. Gratitude, I think, is really special in a lot of other ways too. So another way is that it sort of, it also puts the brakes on a scarcity mentality. So as human beings, we evolved to really pay attention to scarcity, right? So scarcity of food or water or people, you would die in those situations, and people did die all the time, really young, before they had time to reproduce, right? So the human brain evolved to pay attention to where there wasn't enough. And unfortunately, it didn't evolve to pay attention to where there wasn't enough food or water or other people. It evolved to just pay attention to scarcity. This is a really big problem for us today because we live in this more is more kind of a culture where the ongoing assumption is that if you have something of a good thing, more would be better. And it sort of and all the marketing and advertising, it's all geared towards making us believe that we don't have enough of something, right? That more would be better, and that we don't have enough. And that puts our brain into this scarcity mentality, which is really detrimental for us, right? It makes it hard for us to focus. It has a hindering effect on a lot of the parts of our brain that we need to just function in life. And you'll never be happy while you feel like you might be starving to death, or your brain is telling you that you're in a scarcity sort of situation. It's a very overwhelming, very scary feeling to have. So it's just a perception though, right? Like the perception that you don't have enough time puts you into this scarcity mentality, which all of us are like living and breathing all the time, right? And so turning your attention to gratitude can shift that perception. It basically tells your brain like, look, you're not about to die. Simply not having enough time to get to an appointment is not a life or death matter, right? It shifts your perception into an abundance mentality, which tends to make us more generous and more connected to the people around us. And it kind of has a virtuous cycle, because if suddenly you see not just where you have enough of something, but that you have enough to give to somebody else, then you give to them, then you end up feeling more connected to them, and they more connected to you. That makes you feel safer. You're able to relax even further. It's just becomes this really nice, long-lasting joy and sense of meaning. And then the last thing I kind of touched on is that it's a social emotion, and that we know even just thinking about what you're grateful for in your spouse tends to deepen your connection with them. Now, we have theories about why this might be, but suffice it to say, it can cause a really, really significant shift in your relationships.
So it sounds like this is something that we could actually practice or bring more gratitude into our life just by focusing on it.
Yeah, yes. So gratitude is like the easiest thing on the planet, I feel like, to practice. It's not, it's like what your mother told you to do, to count your blessings. Or for me, it was my grandmother told me always to count my blessings, right? I think, so there's some tricky things here. So first of all, gratitude practices have been around for about a decade or more, right? We've had this good research for a long time, and they've really become popularized. And so I have a lot of clients who feel like they should be grateful, but they're just not. And there's something else really big here, right? Like that's happening that hopefully we can talk about, because it's not enough to feel like you should be grateful. You're not going to get any positive effects from feeling like you should be grateful. Like if for whatever reason you're not feeling grateful, you're so deep in that scarcity mentality that like feeling like you should be grateful is just piling on guilt to scarcity. And it isn't that. So we can talk a little bit more about what to do if that's the place where you're in. But aside from that, it's just consistently turning your attention to where you have enough. So you don't even have to go for abundance for this to work. You can just go for sufficiency, right? Like, where in your life do you have enough time, right? Personally, I have enough time to walk the dog several times a day. This is a beautiful example of having enough time for me. Like, it gives me this sense of like, oh, it's so great. The weather here is so good right now. I love being in my neighborhood. I love walking the dog. It's a really genuine sense of gratitude that bubbles up just from having asked myself, like, where do I have enough of something? Even if it's like an area where I'm prone to scarcity, which I tend to be around time, right? So just starting there, I think like having kind of a go-to gratitude practice is a good one. And, we get bored with them, but for a while I would imagine somebody asking me how I am, and then in the morning, and then I would imagine what I would say, something that I was grateful for. And this was to keep myself from telling people that I was busy, right? Which evokes the scarcity mentality. That can be a really good one. I didn't always even have to share it, right? But there's always something that we're excited about or that we feel grateful for. Or maybe there's not, but for me there was.
That's great. And it leads in really well to the next question, which is really the focus of this session, which is around truth and authenticity. So there might be situations where we're not feeling gratitude, and maybe that's because of internal factors, that it's something we need to cultivate more, or maybe it's a situation that is really challenging and maybe needs to change. And so how does balancing, looking at the positive side and really feeling gratitude for what you do have in your life come into play with a sense of being really authentic with what's working or not for you, and telling the truth in your life?
Oh, I'm so glad that you made that connection between those two things, because that's the trouble. That's when gratitude doesn't work, is when you're not telling the truth, right? Gratitude doesn't work if you're like, I should feel grateful for this, but I'm actually truthfully not. Like, this is where fake it till you make it doesn't work. And I'm super not a fan of fake it till you make it. I don't know where that came from, but I sound like one of my kids, but it's true. I'm super not a fan of fake it till you make it because anytime we're pretending or putting up a facade or performing in any way, which a lot of us end up doing a lot of time, all day long on social media, in our workday, we're thinking about how other people perceive us and trying to make ourselves into what we imagine will play well with them. And that's a performance, right? That's not necessarily in integrity with who we really are. It's not always out of integrity, but a lot of times it is. And so anytime we're doing any of those things, we're lying, right? And it doesn't matter to your body whether or not it's a little white lie, a small performance, any shift outside of integrity for you from what your body knows to be the truth is going to cause you undue stress, right? The most stressful human state is a state of lying. This is why polygraph tests work. That's why we call them lie detectors. All they're doing is measuring stress, right? They measure your vocal stress. They measure moisture on your skin. Your body goes bananas when you lie, whether or not you can tell or not. And it doesn't have to be a big lie. It can just be a little tiny one. And you start experiencing that fight or flight response. So to just bring it back to gratitude for 1 second, you can't just be like, okay, I know I should feel grateful that I have this wonderful roof over my head and that I have this great dog and whatever, but I'm just not feeling it right now. Start where you are. That's fine. What are you feeling? Because we just get so numb, right, that it's hard to feel anything. If you've been staving off panic for the last week, or you feel really angry with your boss, or really sad about something your daughter did, or whatever it is, like we have all these difficult emotions, and today we don't feel them. We just pick up our phones and, look through our Facebook feed, or we go shopping online, or we do whatever. We do any of these things to stimulate the reward system. That has the effect of numbing out whatever we didn't want to feel. It doesn't mean the emotion went away. It just means that you don't know what you're feeling anymore, right? You just lose touch with who you are and what you're feeling. And so you've just narrowed your range of emotions into the really super strong ones you can't distract yourself from. And then you're like, I should feel grateful, right? But really, you can't feel anything. Right? Your body is feeling it. It's all still there. In fact, when we suppress emotion or distract ourselves from the emotions, negative emotions tend to amplify physiologically in our body. It's not gone. It's just you're frozen. You're numb. So you need to thaw a little bit. So the first thing is I don't feel grateful. Fine. What do you feel? Oh, there was a thing that happened last week and you're really feeling sad and anxious, or whatever it is. Just let yourself be sad. Just feel it. It's not going to take you, we human beings are very strong. We're very good at handling negative emotions. It will not kill you. It will not be comfortable, but comfort's a new thing, right? Human beings didn't used to be comfortable all the time. You evolved to be able to handle this discomfort. Breathe. You'll be fine.
What are some of the ways that we might be sort of doing this performance or lying in small ways in our lives, or people pleasing?
Well, as a formerly practically professional people pleaser, it's hard for me to see the ways in which I think it's more common with women too, right? I used to be people pleasing all the time, right? That's why I was so tired all the time, because I think girls are really trained to see themselves through other people's eyes. And so anytime you're imagining what somebody else must think of you, you're in trouble, for starters, right? Because it's not, you're highly at risk to be out of alignment for yourself. And I think that there's more and more opportunities, right? I don't think technology is bad. I don't think social media is bad. I do think that we haven't adapted to it properly yet. And so until we harness it for all its good things totally and adapt in a way so that it's not making us feel bad about ourselves all the time, then, we have some adaptation to do. And I do think now we are living in this world where because of social media and just media in general, new media, whatever, we're super hyper aware of other people and what they're doing, and we're constantly comparing ourselves to that. And so that takes you out of like who you are and what you want and who you really, what is self-expressive for you. Like anytime we get into that judgy kind of comparison mode, we're in trouble, right? We're not going to be happy.
And so maybe to bring it back to a two-sided dynamic, what's the difference between, being compassionate and helping people and being concerned with how others feel in a way that might be helpful and creating that connection that you talked about in the beginning, and this people pleasing, which sounds and feels very detrimental?
Yeah, and they are really different. People pleasing is always just about you, right? You're not imagining how other people are feeling themselves or what they are experiencing. You're imagining what they're experiencing about you, right? So compassion is about as positive an emotion as there is. So it's understanding what somebody else is going through and then feeling compelled to help, right? Or feeling like you have the sense to help. And that comes from a really authentic place. So a place of truth for you, for humanity, for whatever it is. People please. It is really interesting because, people hear me say like, oh, you need to feel what it is that you're feeling. And they're like, well, I don't really want to be selfish, right? But it's not selfish. Your reality is not inherently selfish. If you are grounded in your own experience and your own reality and your own truth, then you're in a place where you can authentically see other people and connect to them and know that that connection is true and authentic and not based on, and not a manipulation, basically. And then you're really in a great place to help people, right? Then you can actually see people. And the beautiful thing is that people can really see you, right? So if you put up a facade and people seem to really like it, you're always going to question, did they really like me or do they like the facade? And I can't even really remember what facade I put up that day. So I don't even really know how to be that person again. And it makes you feel really isolated. So when you put yourself out there, your real, true, authentic self, for better or for worse, and people connect to you, it's a real connection. It feels really different.
Do you have any practical advice for moving in that direction for anyone that just feels like really stuck in this dynamic, or even that it's just something that's maybe a subtle part of their life that they'd like to investigate further?
Well, I think just finding a little bit of stillness, right, every day, and just investigating it further, right? Like, so just start with, how am I really feeling? And it's really important to bring an acceptance and a curiosity to that inquiry, right? So a lot of times they're like, I should feel grateful, and I don't. Right? Like we push our emotions off. Like I feel angry instead of thankful about this, or resent this, anyway. So to just come back to like, what is it that I'm feeling? All feelings are okay. It's just a part of the human experience, right? So you might be in a situation which is really difficult, and you can still bring acceptance and curiosity to that, right? So you can sort of surrender your resistance to what is actually happening. Think about what is happening, like the weather. If it's happening right now, there's not a lot that you can do about that, probably. Like, you can get an umbrella, you can protect yourself in negative circumstances or whatever. But mostly we do better when we meet life where it is and we go from there, instead of trying to control things and get everything as we wanted and then showing up, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of the name of your blog, which is Brave Over Perfect. And it feels like it takes a lot of bravery to do what you're saying.
It does. And Mostly though, I feel like it just takes the intention to let go of perfectionism and to like bravery is just the recognition that sometimes it's going to be hard in a lot of ways. I mean, in these types of situations, it's like, okay, I'm not going to be perfect, and also I'm not going to be comfortable all the time, right? Like, I don't want to be thinking about what other people are thinking of me. And because I'm human, I still sometimes do. And that, it makes me, uncomfortable to admit this, but I'm a little afraid, right? Okay, well, I'm also very courageous and can just put out there what it is I want.
I think another factor that really comes up when we think about what will make us happy in our society is around this idea of success. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how feeling successful in our lives can relate to happiness, or feeling unsuccessful, and how we could relate with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're a very success oriented culture, and what comes to mind for me is that it's awfully important how we define success, because if we let our society define success for us, it tends to conflict with a true sense of happiness, right? Like, so our society measures success in external things, in fame, in money, in those kinds of things. And while those things do trigger the reward system in our brain quite a lot, right? They don't actually bring any happiness. We know this beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? There is no question that that being famous, for example, it might give you more power in certain circles, but it certainly does not guarantee happiness, right? It increases your risks of addiction and all kinds of things. So when we think about success, it's really important to take a step back and think, what is success to me? And what will really make me happy? So what statistically is really likely to make us happy, obviously, is our relationships with other people. And so where have you been successful in your relationships, right? And another thing is meaning, right? And fulfillment. And for most people, most people find a sense of meaning and fulfillment in their social value, right? How is their life meaningful to other people? It's one of the deepest ironies that we do not become happier, for the most part, pursuing happiness. But when we start thinking about what would make somebody else happy, that's when we start to transform our own lives.
So when we can think about others and what will make them happy, is there a way that we can take that too far?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that, I don't think that there is such thing as too much generosity or too much compassion, but a lot of times we can go overboard, right, in thinking about other people before we take care of our own needs. So a solid practice is to really take care of our own needs first, right? And basic needs, not like our own needs for stimulating the reward system in our brain. That's not a need, right? But just basic self-care, sleep, exercise, getting nutritious food. Once those things are taken care of, then we can really turn our attention to how can we make the world a better place, right? And that doesn't have to be like solve global warming, although I would really appreciate it if anybody watching did solve that. But it can be like, okay, right here, right now, my neighbor across the street is about to have a baby, right? How can I make her life a little bit easier? How can I make my family run a little bit smoother? How can actually, there is some evidence that getting outside of your own immediate family is fairly important. So like thinking at the neighborhood level, the school level, how can you contribute? Those things bring us incredible sense of meaning and fulfillment. And can I add one more thing about that? Not just doing the things like you feel like you should do, because that's people pleasing again, right? That's like taking other people's expectations or expectations, things you were sort of like trained to think, oh, I should do this. I have to do this, right? Like I have to volunteer in my kid's classroom, even though I hate doing it because that's what a good mother does or whatever. No, none of that, right? It still has to be in integrity to yourself. So in my own life, I do volunteer at all. I have 4 kids in 4 different schools right now. And so that's a lot of potential work, volunteer work or ways to contribute. And I have found like, I don't do anything that doesn't sound fun for me to do at the volunteer level with their schools. But then I get to do these things that nobody else wants to do. Like I was just the MC at an event and everybody was like, oh God, better you than me. That's like horrible. I would never want to stand in front of all those people. Well, I loved it. I thought it was great. I think it's fun to do those kinds of things. I got to talk to all the people. I got to whatever. So finding that for me, right? Like I could barely sleep that night because I was so happy and wound up because it was just such a great fun thing for me personally to do. It was like everybody else's worst nightmare. So finding what's fun for you. What is your contribution? It's not going to be what society necessarily tells you.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And as we're talking about this area of our work and finding purpose and doing things that are meaningful and contributing in a meaningful way, I think another question that can come up is around stress. I'm curious if you could share a little bit about how stress relates with happiness, meaning, and purpose.
And truth, because I think that whenever we're having a really stressful thought, there's something untrue about it. And so always looking, I mean, stress for the most part, so stress can be thought of as like a fear response, right? It's fight or flight. It's like you're afraid of something. You need to escape something. That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about stress. And so for the most part, we have a lot of like unjustified fear responses, right? Like we're not going to benefit from knowing that like we don't have enough time or whatever. Like it doesn't help us anymore. It's like we have this massive physiological response that does not help us save us from the like tiger that's pursuing us anymore, right? It is completely unhelpful to have that response. And it's completely within our control because it's all in our heads now. I mean, I was giving a talk about stress to a group of high school students who go to a school that's like way up in the hills in California. And I was like, name a time like that you were stressed and your fight or flight response actually helped you. And the kids were like, well, it helped me focus when studying for my chemistry test. No, it did not help you focus. In fact, it was probably, it really hindered your ability to learn. But then a kid said, well, this morning I was doing my cross country run and on the trail I came across a bear. And I was like, okay, you're the only one in the whole country, right? Like, yes, that's a helpful fight or flight, or he froze and then he booked it out of there, right? I'm like, yes, but you're the only one. That never happens. What are the odds that this morning, so anyway, just keeping that in mind that you don't have to believe everything you think, right? You're going to think a lot of really scary thoughts, and they're going to cause your body to go into this stress response that is not going to help you in modern life. So maybe before that happens, train yourself to question your thoughts. Like, is it really true? Right? Is it really true that you don't have enough time, or that it's going to really matter what other people think of you, or whatever else is stressing you out? It's probably not true. And it's probably not helpful to believe that it's true.
Thank you for that. And, through this week, we're talking about a lot of things where people might be inspired to change some of their long-lasting habits that they've had, and in this session as well. Could you speak a little bit about habit change and how we might be able to make some of these shifts without adding more stress and pressure on ourselves?
Sure. I love habit change. because so our habits are mammalian ability to exist on autopilot, right? Like the dogs and the birds and animals all around us have an unbelievable autopilot that as human beings we sort of discount. We think that we're going to get everything done through the sheer force of our ironclad will. And then we feel really bad about ourselves when we can't do it because our willpower is for the most part pretty limited, and it's just not everything, right? So I love helping people get into new habits. I think there's so much potential there. There's a trick to it, right? We understand how the human brain gets into habits, or even how horses get into habits, or animals in general. And like everything else we've been talking about, it's really hard these days because getting into habits really depends on sort of an appropriate use of the reward system in your brain. And that does not mean giving yourself a cookie when you do what you want, but the brain needs to have an intrinsic reward in whatever behavior you're trying to get into the habit of doing. And it's really hard to get into a new habit when you're triggering the reward system all the time. Because your brain doesn't necessarily associate any one particular behavior aside from the fact that you checked your email and then you checked your phone, and then that gets all of the credit for it. So it's a tough thing to do, but we do understand it. And I mean, I've blogged millions of times about this because I want people to be able to easily access the sort of code related to habits. I can tell you more. Do you want me to tell you more about how to get into a habit?
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. So there's basically 3 components to a habit. There's something that triggers the habit. It's a behavior usually that you're already in the habit of, or it could be a time of day, or it could be an emotion, or an event like getting cut off in your car or something like that. And then there's the actual behavior or the routine. And this is sometimes a bad habit or sometimes what you're trying to do, trying to get into the habit of. And then there's the reward. And it works best when those 3 things come in rapid succession. So if you're trying to get out of a bad habit, do you want to give me an example in your own life of something? And I can walk you through the process. It's one of my favorites.
Bad habit in my life. Let's see.
Or a habit that you want to get into.
How about we've been using this example of starting a daily meditation practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so starting with an existing trigger, right? So every morning you probably brush your teeth. And so putting your daily meditation practice on, or it could be like when you first come home from work or whatever it is, but that you need to associate the behavior, the meditation, with an existing anchor or trigger for that. And here's the trick. It has to be something that you can meditate. It has to be every day. Like if you want to meditate every day, or not, it's not necessarily every day, but every time you do the trigger, every time you brush your teeth then in the morning, then you have to meditate, right? You can't have it can't be, well, when I come home, because you can't always do that when you come home. Or for a while I was trying to do my meditation in the morning and I'm like, okay, when my alarm goes off, then I'll meditate. But it just didn't, you can't do it every single time. So finding something. And you notice with runners and things like that, it can be just walking in and sitting on a cushion that will trigger the whole thing. But starting, with something every weekday at 7 a.m. or whatever it is. So what could your trigger be for this? For yours?
For me.
I'm going to walk you through it.
Yeah, I think for me, the morning works well for meditation. So
what's something you do every morning, but that okay, so I'm going to give you an example. So I wanted to do more exercise and I just wanted to be outside hiking more or walking the dog more. So every time I fed the dog, after I fed the dog, I always walk the dog. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be like 30 seconds. But so now I will not feed the dog if I'm not going to walk him. I have one of the kids do it. So what's something like that for you?
Well, I have tea every morning, sort of first thing.
Okay. So this is great. It's a perfect one. So you have tea, and then every single time you have tea, you meditate. And if ever you can't have meditate, you don't have tea. So you want to link those two things because you're already doing that, and you're going to like harness your momentum towards the tea. And what I like about that is the tea's like got a little reward and a little quietness too. You know what I mean? Like it seems perfect. Okay. So then the actual behavior, you just want to start ridiculously small. And what you want to do is not create resistance, because once you create resistance, like the human brain does not like to change. It loves its habits exactly as they are. It does not want new ones. It wants the same old boring thing, right? It wants novelty, right? It doesn't want to, but that's a whole other story. So what you want to do is only 30 seconds of meditation the first day, right? Like anything less than 30 seconds, you're going to have a really hard time making a case not to do it, right? You're going to like, I don't have time, doesn't work. It will be uncomfortable, doesn't work, right? Like whatever, it's only 30 seconds. So just break it down really, really small. And then every 4 days, increase it a little bit. But if you ever notice any sort of resistance, like even the smallest bit of resistance, then you need to dial it back, because you'll eventually just, not do it, because you'll have a good enough excuse at some point. And this is not the way we work, right? Like, I mean, at least people like me, overachieving types, I'm like, I'm going to exercise. So I'm going to lift weights 5 times a week, and I'm going to stretch, and I'm going to, do high intensity training, and I'm going to I create these massive plans. And then I do it really well for a whole week. And then I have a spectacular failure because I'm like, I have a cold, right? Like if I had just been like, I'm going to do 1 push-up, I would have been fine, right? I could have, like with a cold, I could do 1 push-up. Can I run a half marathon? Definitely not, right? So it's just building small thing. And then the third thing is the reward, right? So really tapping in to whatever intrinsic reward is there. And then BJ Fogg, who is a researcher at Stanford who studies behavior change a lot, he calls it a yay me award or reward. And for me, I love that. So you meditate and you tap into the feelings of calm or the like benefits that are there, because that's intrinsic to it. Like you really, and sometimes it won't be there, right? Because sometimes you will just have had a lot of panicky thoughts and not meditated, right? And so if that happens, you go to the yay me reward, right? Which is like, even though this was uncomfortable, yay me. I did it anyway. I am courageous in facing like the stillness and the lack of stimulation, and whatever was hard. You can, even if it's not intrinsically rewarding, you can still give yourself that yay me reward.
I think that's so helpful as we move through this week, because there's so many things that are coming up where you might see aspects of your life that you're wanting to shift in a different way, and to have a very practical 3-step process to do it in a way that is reasonable and gentle on ourselves, and not just relying purely on our willpower.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. As we come to a close, I'd like to ask if there is one thing from what we talked about today or from your work that you'd like the audience to remember. What would that be?
I think I would like people to remember to just practice telling the truth, right? So not telling people like your judgments, right? That's not what I mean, right? And you don't even have to tell the truth, just living your truth, right? Just checking in with yourself, like what is it that you really want? Who are you really? And like just to have a moment in which you just see, how is it that you're really feeling? For 1 minute, don't worry about how you should feel, and look within yourself to see how you do feel.
Well, thank you again so much for your time. And for anyone that's interested in learning more about Dr. Carter's work, you can look below this video, and we have links to her website, and you can check her out there. Thanks.